Billionaire Arab pays a single mother to dance and discovers a secret that leaves him shocked. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. In a quiet, sun-faded corner of Doha, the glimmering capital of Qatar, where glass towers rise defiantly from golden desert sands, sits a modest little cafe. Worn and weathered, it clings to life thanks to curious tourists passing through. Behind the counter stood Leah, her black hair tied neatly back, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Once, she had been a celebrated folk dancer in Syria, her movements a tribute to heritage and passion. Now, her hands were rough from wiping tables and counting spare coins, her every effort aimed at keeping her little boy alive. Youssef, her 3-year-old son, was a delicate child, often sick, highly sensitive, and the very center of her world. When his tiny body burned with fever, Leah would sit through the night, whispering lullabies from a country they could no longer call home. Then, on a warm March afternoon, the final thread of stability unraveled. Her cafe manager pulled her aside. "I'm sorry, Leah, but we have to cut your hours. The tourist flow's been too low. We can't afford to keep everyone." The words hit like a slap. Rent, medicine, food. What now? She left work with lead in her feet and the weight of survival pressing down harder than ever. No one on the street looked twice at her, just another refugee mother, fading into the background of a glittering world that had no place for her. But back at the cafe, something unexpected waited. A man, who had been seated alone for hours, still hadn't left. He wore a pristine white thobe, embroidered with fine silver thread. His presence wasn't just elegant, it was commanding. And his eyes, they didn't leer, they studied. Khed al-Fahim. The name alone made heads turn. A billionaire, reclusive, feared and respected in equal measure. Before she could retreat, a security guard approached quietly and placed an envelope on her cleaning tray. "Mr. Al-Fahim asked me to give this to you," he said, before disappearing into the crowd. Inside was a single handwritten note, sharp, elegant penmanship. "Leah Roshan, I have a proposal that could change your life, if you're brave enough to hear it. Meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. KAF." Back in her cramped rental room near the industrial zone, Leah sat by the flickering light of a cheap lamp, staring at the note. The walls were thin, the air was dry, and in the background, Youssef coughed in his sleep. A part of her wanted to throw the paper away, rip it, burn it, forget it ever came. But she looked at her child, fragile, dreaming, unaware, and in that moment, fear gave way to resolve. She placed the note beside his pillow and whispered, "Whatever's waiting, I'll face it. For you." Once, her dances were her pride. Now they were a memory. But fate has a cruel sense of irony, because the very thing she left behind may be the only way forward. The palace loomed like something out of a forgotten legend, carved from ivory stone, lit by soft firelight, and silent as a cathedral at midnight. As Leah stepped across the marble floor, her worn shoes echoed faintly beneath towering chandeliers. She was no longer in the noisy cafe, no longer just a mother scraping by. She had crossed a threshold into a world where power breathed quietly, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was offered without a price. A butler, dressed in crisp white, led her down a hallway that smelled faintly of jasmine and old incense. Every inch of the place whispered wealth. But it wasn't the gold or glass that made her heart pound. It was who was waiting at the end of that hallway. Khed al-Fahim sat in a high-backed chair, framed by velvet drapes and a wall of flickering candles. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his eyes never left her. They held the kind of focus that made people forget how to breathe. "Leah," he said, his voice smooth, deep, and slow. Thank you for coming." She stayed standing, arms tense at her sides. "You said you had a proposal," she replied carefully. "I did," he nodded. "And I still do." He gestured toward the leather chair across from him. She hesitated, then sat. "I've done my research," Ked continued. "I know your background. Before the war, you danced." Leah's body tensed. That was a long time ago. "Some traditions," he said softly, "are worth preserving, especially when performed by someone who carries them in her blood." She said nothing, her eyes narrowing. Then came the offer. "I want you to dance, not for the public, not in a theater. Here, in my palace. For me, and for a select few guests I trust." Leah's breath caught. He leaned forward, folding his hands. "There will be no contact, no humiliation. You'll have full control. I will ensure privacy, safety, and payment that will ensure your son never goes hungry again." He slid a folder across the table. The contract. Inside, dates, rules, conditions. Every line coldly professional. Generous compensation, complete discretion, zero tolerance for misconduct. It was also polished. And yet, Leah didn't pick it up. She stared at it like it might catch fire. "I haven't danced since Syria," she said, her voice low. "I swore I never would. That part of me died with the rest of my life." Ked didn't speak. He simply watched. Then, slowly, almost against her own will, Leah reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver anklet, old and worn. Tiny bells lined the chain. Soft, fragile things that used to ring when her mother danced. Leah held it in her palm for a moment. The weight of it was memory, history, pain, and love. "For my son," she whispered. She signed. That night, in a room scented with sandalwood and silence, Leah stood alone. She slipped the anklet around her ankle. As the bells chimed softly for the first time in years, something inside her shifted. Not broken, not yet whole, but alive again. A dancer was being reborn. But what she didn't yet know was that this contract wasn't just a performance. It was the first step into a world where every smile might hide a secret, and where survival would demand more than grace. It would demand courage. The ink on the contract had barely dried, but the consequences had already begun to ripple, and behind every candlelit corner of the palace, shadows were waiting. The first night. The desert wind whispered through the towering arches of the palace, like a breath from another time. Inside the grand hall, bathed in the glow of 100 flickering candles and glittering crystal chandeliers, silence reigned. Persian carpets softened every step, and the music, subtle, hypnotic, floated through the air like a distant memory calling her name. Leah stepped forward. Gone was the plain waitress uniform. Tonight she wore a deep blue silk gown embroidered in gold, delicate and timeless. Her shoulders were bare, her frame poised and elegant. Her hair was pinned back loosely, a few strands brushing her cheek. But most importantly, around her ankle, she fastened an old silver bell anklet, her mother's, the last thing she had left from the woman who once taught her how to dance. Its tiny chime was soft but steady, like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes briefly. To survive, to protect Yusuf, her son, she had to remember who she was. At the far end of the room sat Ked al-Fahim, quiet and composed, his hands resting on his lap. Two distinguished guests flanked him, their whispers respectful, their gazes curious. But Ked's eyes never left Leah. He didn't watch like a man seeking entertainment. He watched as if something about her unsettled the part of him he had long buried. Leah began to dance. There was no introduction, no applause, just movement. Her arms floated through the air like drifting silk. Her feet traced silent circles across the rug. Her gown whispered with every turn, and the bells at her ankle. They rang out not in joy, but in memory, in grief. This wasn't just a performance. It was years of hunger, sleepless nights nursing a sick child, the sound of bomb sirens still echoing in her bones. It was a lullaby swallowed mid-note, a prayer uttered under her breath, unheard by anyone but God. Now it was all being released, one motion at a time. Ked watched her intently, and for the first time in years, something inside him stirred. It wasn't desire, it wasn't pity, it was recognition. He didn't know her story, but somehow he felt it. When the music stopped, the room fell into stillness. One guest clapped softly, another simply nodded. But Ked said nothing. He stood, slowly walked forward, stopped at a respectful distance, and spoke in a voice low enough for only her to hear. "You weren't trying to seduce. You were telling a story, and I heard every word." The second night, she returned. Not because the contract required it, but because something in her had awakened. Something ancient, something sacred. There were no guests this time, only Ked. Seated again in silence, waiting. She danced again, no fear, no hesitation. And this time, her eyes met his. In that moment, something wordless passed between them. Not romance, not expectation, just a moment of undeniable humanity between two people from opposite worlds. He saw her, and she knew she had been seen. Later that night, Leah sat before the mirror in her room, unpinning her hair slowly, her fingers trembling. For a long time, she stared at her reflection. And for the first time in years, she didn't see a refugee. She didn't see a tired single mother. She saw a woman, still standing, still dreaming, still alive. Some stories don't need words. Some hearts, though born in distant worlds, can recognize one another in the silence between steps. In a place ruled by power and protocol, that night, it was the language of the soul that finally broke through. The palace was quiet, but not peaceful. Its golden halls shimmered in the late evening light, casting long reflections on polished marble floors. Somewhere deep inside, a harp played softly, notes drifting like petals through the air. Leah walked slowly down a corridor, arms wrapped around her waist. The soft jingle of her ankle bells echoed with every step. Remnants of the dance she had just performed in the grand hall. Her feet ached, her chest still rose and fell in shallow breaths, but her mind was elsewhere. On her son, on the contract she'd signed, on the man whose eyes followed her so intently during every performance. She had just turned a corner near the east wing when she felt it. A presence. Cold. Still. Like the moment before a sandstorm. There, standing tall in a sapphire silk gown, was Sophia Al-Fahim, Ked's cousin. Regal, composed, razor-sharp in every detail. She didn't speak at first, just watched, her gaze sliding over Leah's modest dress and sweat-lined brow. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "So," she said, voice cool as stone, "you're the girl who dances." It wasn't a question. It was an insult wrapped in observation. Leah didn't flinch. "My name is Leah Roshan," she said steadily. "I dance to feed my son." Sophia tilted her head, amused. "Touching. But don't get too comfortable. Ked's attention is like desert rain. Brief, unpredictable. When he moves on, where will that leave you?" Leah's voice was calm, but firm. "I didn't come here for attention. I came here to keep my son alive." Sophia stepped closer, her perfume sweet and suffocating. "This palace isn't for women like you. You'll always be an outsider, no matter how beautifully you spin." The words sliced like glass. And yet, Leah didn't retreat. Then I'll keep spinning until he's safe. That night, Ked stood behind the velvet curtains of the drawing room. He had witnessed enough. Leah didn't back down. And Sophia, well, she had just drawn a line in the sand. The palace shifted after that. Staff whispered more. Schedules changed. Costumes mysteriously altered. More revealing, inappropriate, subtle sabotage. Leah saw it, felt it, and she went to Ked. In his study, bathed in the amber light of the setting sun, she stood before him. "She's trying to shame me," she said. Ked turned, his jaw tight. "Sophia doesn't lose, and now she sees you as a threat. Not just because I dance," Leah added, "because you see me." He met her eyes. "I do, and that's why she's afraid." That evening, Sophia came to watch. Her presence was a weight in the room. She never clapped, never blinked, just watched, arms folded, eyes sharp. And when the music ended, she stood and left without a word. But the war had begun. Not of swords, but of whispers, glances, and pressure applied with precision. Sophia had power, but Leah had purpose. And Sophia had miscalculated one thing. A mother doesn't break. A mother burns, especially when she's dancing not for applause, but for her child's life. In palaces made of marble, some cracks begin in silence, and sometimes the smallest dancer steps loudest, until the whole foundation shakes. The palace at night was always eerily quiet, as if its marble walls were holding their breath. The long corridors, vast and echoing, seemed to swallow every footstep. And yet there was a feeling that stories, untold and unresolved, lingered in the silence. After her 6th performance, Leah walked slowly back to her room, her ankle bells silent for once. The golden lanterns cast faint shadows across the marble, and the air felt heavy, like something unseen was watching. Then, from behind a nearby door, she heard it. A low voice, tense and cautious. "She must not know, not yet." She froze. It was Ked. His voice wasn't the composed, powerful tone she had come to know. This voice trembled with something else. Fear. Or guilt. He didn't know she was there. He didn't know someone had heard. But Leah did. And those words planted a seed of doubt that refused to stay quiet. What wasn't she supposed to know? Why, not yet? And what was it that could shake a man like Ked? That night, she lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling of her room, her mind running through every moment since they met. Questions circled her thoughts like storm clouds waiting to break. Days later, Ked invited her to the garden behind the palace. It was a space untouched by opulence, where flowers grew wild and time seemed to pause. The sun filtered gently through the trees, casting dappled light onto the stone path as they walked in silence, side by side. He didn't lead her, he walked with her, and that said more than words. When they reached a small pond rimmed with jasmine, he finally spoke. "Leah," he began, voice low, "have you ever wondered why I chose you?" She said nothing. He didn't look at her. His eyes were on the water, still, deep and dark. "It wasn't your beauty, and it wasn't just your dance. It was because you reminded me of Amal." That name struck something in her chest. "Amal was my wife," he continued. "She wasn't from a noble background. She was fire and music and rebellion, and she made this place, this life, feel alive." Leah's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. "But my family, they never accepted her. To them she was a threat. She didn't know her place, they said. She was too bold, too different, too free." Ked's jaw tightened. And then, the accident. He fell silent. The word hung in the air like smoke. "I was told it was an accident. Everyone said it was, but I've never believed it." His voice cracked, just slightly. I trusted the wrong people. I stayed silent when I should have fought. And the price was her life. Now he turned to Leah, and for the first time, he let her see the raw truth behind the polished mask. I've lived with that guilt every day since. And when I saw you, when I saw how fiercely you fight for your son, I knew I couldn't let history repeat itself. She said nothing. But in that moment, the weight he carried became her own. Not because he asked her to bear it, but because she saw the man behind the power. A man grieving, a man trying to make things right. They stood there as the breeze rustled the leaves, and somewhere nearby, a single petal fell into the water, sending out ripples that faded into silence. That night, Ked returned alone to a room no one dared enter. He lit a single candle, not for light, but for memory. The flame flickered in the stillness, casting long shadows on the walls. On a nearby shelf sat a photograph. Amal, smiling, alive. He ran his thumb across her face, eyes clouded with everything he'd lost. Some shadows in life never go away. You don't banish them. You learn to live with them. And that night, Ked wasn't the billionaire or the master of a grand palace. He was a man who had once failed to protect the woman he loved. And now, he was determined never to make that mistake again. By now, Leah had grown used to the palace's strange rhythm. The silence between the gilded walls, the whispers in the corridors, the lingering eyes. But nothing could have prepared her for what Sophia was about to do. Behind her poised demeanor and polite smiles, Sophia was a woman who never forgot a slight. And in her eyes, Leah's mere presence was an unforgivable offense. Late one evening, under the flicker of chandelier light, Sophia met with a man in a dark, private chamber. He was quiet, nondescript, his face forgettable, which made him perfect. She handed him a folder sealed with a red wax stamp. Inside, doctored documents, manipulated photographs, and forged statements, fabricated evidence suggesting Leah had violated cultural boundaries and disrespected sacred traditions. "This will be enough," Sophia said, her voice icy. "Take it to the authorities. Make sure they act." Meanwhile, unaware of the storm approaching, Leah was trying to soothe her son. That night, Yusuf was burning with fever, his small frame drenched in sweat, his breathing shallow. Panic gripped her chest like a vice. Without hesitation, Ked himself appeared at her door. He didn't send guards or assistants. He didn't bark orders. He stepped inside, scooped the fragile child into his arms, and said only, "Let's go." In the dark of night, their convoy sped through the empty roads of Doha. Inside the car, Ked held Yusuf close, whispering gently to keep him calm while Leah watched, stunned. This was the man they all feared? The ruthless businessman? Here he was, cradling her son as if he were his own. At the hospital, he stood by as doctors treated the child, refusing to leave. Hours later, when Yusuf's fever finally broke and he slept peacefully in Leah's arms, Ked simply sat nearby in silence, exhausted but still alert. She looked at him, and for the first time, really saw him. Not as a powerful man, but as a human being. One with regrets, one with empathy. Back at the palace, just before dawn, Leah sat beside her son's bed, brushing his hair back gently. Ked remained by the window, watching the sun begin to rise over the dunes. "Thank you," she said softly. He turned, his voice low and steady. "You don't need to thank me, Leah. Protecting him, protecting you, it's not charity. It's what I should have done a long time ago, for someone else." That moment shifted something between them. Their bond, once born of desperation and duty, was growing into something deeper. He didn't just shield her from danger. He saw her, heard her, respected her. But just as light began to enter their world, Darkness crept closer. That very morning, an official envelope arrived at the palace gate, sealed with the mark of the Qatari authorities. Inside was a formal complaint filed against Leia, accusations of moral misconduct and cultural disrespect, supported by photos, signatures, and statements, all forged. Ked read the file with a stony face. His silence was terrifying. Sophia watched from a distance, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. But what she didn't know was that Ked had already begun his own quiet investigation. He had sensed her moves. He'd even intercepted whispers among the staff. And now, with this blatant attack, she had crossed a line. He turned to his head of security. Find the source, follow the trail, quietly, discreetly, but thoroughly. While Leah tried to rest, unaware of the full scope of what was unfolding, Ked moved like a man with purpose. He was no longer reacting. He was preparing to strike back. The palace was now a pressure cooker. One false move, one wrong breath, and everything could explode. Because Sophia had drawn her blade. But this time, Ked was ready to draw his. They came for Leah just before dawn, under a pale sky barely tinted with morning. Two uniformed men, faces carved from stone, knocked once, sharp, deliberate, before entering her chamber uninvited. Yusuf was still asleep, his little body wrapped in thin linen, cheeks flushed from the warmth of dreams. Leia froze. Her fingers instinctively moved to cover his tiny chest, as if her body alone could shield him. "Leia Roshan," the taller man said, voice cold and practiced. "You are under investigation for moral misconduct and defamation of noble traditions. You will come with us." Her breath hitched. She looked around the room as if trying to memorize it, every flicker of the lamp, every crease in the curtains, as if she would never see it again. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Let me kiss my son goodbye." They didn't stop her. She bent low, placed a trembling kiss on Yusuf's forehead, and whispered through the lump in her throat, "Mama loves you. Always." Then she stood tall and followed them into the corridor, barefoot and silent, like a ghost already sentenced. Far above, hidden behind a lattice screen on the upper balcony, Sophia watched. She sipped tea from fine porcelain, her eyes sharp, unblinking. There was no triumph on her face, only the calm certainty of a queen removing an unworthy piece from the board. But she had miscalculated. Because Ked was not just a man of wealth and title. He was a man who, once awakened, became impossible to stop. The news reached him within the hour. The steward who delivered it barely finished the sentence before Ked's chair scraped against marble and crashed to the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't demand. He moved, fast, focused, furious. By noon, every contact, every favor, every debt ever owed to the House of Al-Fahim was being called in. Ked personally interrogated the palace staff, cross-checked logs, dates, and documents. What he uncovered was worse than he expected. Sophia had fabricated documents with damning accusations. She had bribed 2 junior council members, arranged a planted witness, and triggered the old morality laws, rarely used except in political purges. Leah had been framed. And if Ked didn't act fast, she'd be deported, or worse, imprisoned indefinitely under public scandal. He didn't waste time. By sunset, he had arranged an emergency session of the family council. The ancestral chamber, an ancient, towering room with carved wood ceilings and stained glass windows depicting generations of noble lineage, was summoned into silence. Council members sat in ornate chairs, some curious, some judgmental, all cloaked in the gravity of their bloodline. Leah stood alone in the center. Her wrists were free now, but her pride was still bruised. Her eyes flicked around the room, meeting stares that had already decided her fate. She looked for Ked, and then he entered. He wasn't dressed in gold or ceremony. He wore black, but it wasn't his attire that held the room. It was his presence. Every step echoed like a war drum. Every eye followed him as he crossed the marble floor and stood beside Leah, defying tradition. "I will speak," he said, without waiting for permission. "And I will be heard." There was a murmur. Then silence. Ked held up a thick folder, filled with evidence. "Leah Roshan has been accused of dishonor. But the true dishonor," he said, voice steel-edged, "lies in what has been done to her." He laid out every document, pointed to forged signatures, showed surveillance logs that contradicted the accusations, brought forward a shaken but repentant palace guard who admitted to taking Sophia's money. Then he turned to Sophia. "Tell me, cousin," he said, "how far would you go to destroy a woman who never raised a hand against you?" Sophia remained seated, her lips tight. "You did this because you were afraid," Ked continued, "afraid that my loyalty to a woman like Leah, one with no title, no family crest, would threaten the world you built on pride and cruelty." He walked forward, voice rising. "You say she doesn't belong here, but she has endured more than most of you ever will. She stood alone, with no allies, no protection, and yet she never broke. That is not shame. That is strength." Gasps, whispers, eyes widened. Sophia rose. "You're blinded by emotion." "No," Ked said, stepping closer. "I'm no longer blinded by silence." He slammed a final piece of paper onto the table, Sophia's direct written orders to her contact within the palace guard, her seal, her signature, her intent. The room froze. The elder of the council, Abbas, stood. His voice was like a verdict from the mountains themselves. "Sophia Al-Fahim, you are hereby stripped of your titles, your influence, and your place in this palace. You will be placed under investigation by the regional authorities. Your actions have brought shame upon this house." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but the weight of the moment silenced even her. Guards stepped forward. She didn't resist. She didn't scream. She only turned back once, not at Ked, but at Leah. And for the first time there was fear in her eyes. As the doors closed behind her, Ked turned to Leah and extended his hand. She hesitated, then took it. He helped her step forward, then turned to the council one last time. "She is not just a dancer. She is a mother, a survivor, a woman of courage. And in this house of stone and silence, her truth has roared louder than all our bloodlines." The council stood. Applause echoed through the chamber, louder than any verdict. For once, tradition bowed to justice. And for the first time since she arrived in that glittering palace of shadows, Leah didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like she belonged. The desert at night is nothing like the desert by day. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the scorching heat gave way to a hush. Cool, vast, and impossibly still. The sky turned into a black velvet canvas, stitched with stars that stretched endlessly across the heavens. And in the heart of what seemed like nowhere, a hidden oasis emerged, like a dream no one dared to believe. Leah sat quietly in the back of the pearl-colored SUV, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the window as beams of light swept across dunes like waves of gold. Her heart beat with a confused rhythm, equal parts anxious and hopeful. Ked hadn't told her much, just that there was something he needed to show her, something no one else had ever seen. When the vehicle came to a stop, Leah stepped out and gasped softly. In front of her was a vision that felt stolen from another world. A small, secluded oasis, surrounded by palm trees swaying gently in the wind. A path lined with lanterns led to a wooden table covered in white linen, adorned with wild desert flowers and soft, glowing candles in glass jars. Ked stepped out first, not in a suit, not cloaked in the aura of wealth or control, but in a simple white tunic, sleeves rolled, hair tousled. He looked like a man stripped down to the most human part of himself. Leah followed, barefoot. Her feet sank into the cool sand, and the old ankle bracelet she hadn't worn in years, a gift from her mother, jingled softly with each step, like a heartbeat echoing the emotion rising in her chest. Ked waited by the table, his eyes never leaving hers. "I used to think the palace was the most beautiful place in my world," he said quietly. "But then you walked in, and I realized beauty isn't in gold or chandeliers. It's in a woman who dances for her child, who speaks with her silence, who refuses to bend." Leah didn't speak. Not yet. Her heart was too full of questions, of fear, of longing, of hope too dangerous to name. They shared a meal beneath the stars, slow, tender, fragrant with spices. And when it was over, Ked stood and walked around the table. No grand gestures, no audience, just him, just her. He knelt, the way no one had likely ever seen a man like him kneel. "I'm not looking for a perfect woman," he said, voice steady but thick with feeling. "I'm looking for someone who's strong enough to stand, someone who still chooses to love, even after the world tried to break her. You've reminded me who I was before the titles, before the grief." He opened a small box. Inside was not a diamond, not a display of excess, just a simple brushed gold ring engraved in old Arabic. "One soul, two paths." Leah clutched the edge of her dress. She had sworn off hope so many times, sworn that love was a luxury she couldn't afford while surviving. But now, in this still sacred moment, she knew something deeper. Love wasn't about rescue. It was about presence. "I'm not saying yes," she whispered through tears, "because I need someone to save me. I'm saying yes, because I want to walk beside someone who won't let go when I fall." Ked didn't reply. He simply took her hand, slid the ring onto her finger, and pulled her gently into his arms. Around them, the desert wind swirled like a silent blessing. That night, beneath a sky alive with stars, they sat together on a rug laid across the sand, a small fire crackling between them. No words were needed. In the quiet, in the glow of firelight and the warmth of a shared truth, they knew. Whatever came next, they had chosen each other. Not out of debt, not out of rescue, but out of the rare, undeniable miracle of finding each other after everything they had lost. The sun rose gently over the palace, no longer casting long, cold shadows, but instead warming the golden stones as if blessing what had been rebuilt from the ground up. Not with marble, but with love, resilience, and second chances. The wedding wasn't grand by royal standards. There were no fireworks, no world leaders in attendance, no televised spectacle. But it was intimate, honest, and heartfelt. Guests gathered beneath an arch woven with jasmine and olive branches, symbols of peace and new beginnings. Leah wore a flowing white dress that moved like a soft breeze. Ked, in a traditional robe of deep earth tones, stood beside her, not as a billionaire, not as a ruler, but as a man who had found his missing piece. They exchanged vows in front of friends, staff, and children from the local village. Youssef, now healthier and beaming with joy, held a small pillow with their rings. When Leah knelt to kiss his forehead before saying, "I do," there wasn't a dry eye in the courtyard. But it wasn't the ceremony that marked their transformation. It was what came after. Leah didn't ask for riches or influence. What she wanted was purpose. So, with Ked's unwavering support, she opened a small school in a quiet wing of the palace, once left unused. It began with a few rugs, donated instruments, and blank sketch pads. Soon, It echoed with music, color, and laughter. Children who once worked in the streets now learned to paint, dance, sing, and tell their own stories. Many for the first time. Leah taught with a kind of grace that couldn't be learned, only earned through pain and perseverance. She wasn't just an instructor. She was a guide, a mother figure to many, a keeper of dreams once thought impossible. The palace changed with her. Walls once adorned with silent tapestries now held paintings from the children. The library, long untouched, became a refuge for curious minds. The courtyard filled with barefoot dancers during dusk as Leah clapped her hands in rhythm, her silver anklet chiming like a song of remembrance and hope. As for Ked, the man who once walked alone in shadows now found peace in sharing light. He no longer sought control in every corner. He learned to let go, to trust, to live in the moment. Evenings often found him sitting under the pergola, watching Yusuf race across the garden, his laughter ringing like music through the air. Together they built more than a home. They built a sanctuary, not just for themselves, but for others like them. People who had been bruised by the world, but not broken. The scars remained, of course, but they no longer defined Leah, no longer haunted Ked. They were simply reminders of everything survived and everything still worth fighting for. And in the quiet moments, when the world paused, Leah would sometimes look out across the courtyard, her son by her side, and whisper to herself, This is the life I never dared to dream." In the years that followed, the story of Leah, Ked, and Yusuf spread far beyond the golden walls of the palace. Whispers of a refugee woman who once danced not for fame, not for fortune, but to keep her son alive, became legend. Within the region, and eventually beyond, they were seen as a living symbol of love that defied class, of courage that broke through centuries of tradition, and of quiet strength that reshaped an empire from the inside out. The palace, once a fortress of silence and protocol, had changed. Its halls now rang with music, children's laughter, and the rhythm of feet moving in unison, each beat echoing resilience. One afternoon, as the sun hung low over the dunes and painted the courtyard in amber light, Yusuf, now old enough to ask questions that mattered, looked up at his mother as she guided a group of young dancers across the tiles. He tilted his head, curious. "Mama, why do you dance so beautifully?" Leah paused. She knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the weight of everything she had lived through. "Because, my love," she said, "every step I take is to keep you in my life." And in that moment, her son didn't need to understand every battle she had fought, every fear she had swallowed, or every tear she had hidden. He only needed to feel her truth, and he did. Because Leah's dance was never about movement. It was about memory, about sacrifice, about survival, and most of all, it was about love. There are women who dance for joy, others dance for art, but some dance to reclaim their child's right to live, to fight back against the silence, to demand that the world look, truly look, and see their worth. These women do not wear armor. They don't stand on podiums. They don't ask to be heroes. And yet, they are. In the quiet corners of history, they move like wind, soft, persistent, unstoppable. And in their wake, lives are changed. So when the world tells you it's too late, or that you're too small, too poor, too broken, remember Leah. Remember the mother who danced in silence, with bells on her ankles and fire in her heart. Because sometimes, the most powerful warriors don't raise swords, they raise children. And if you've made it all the way here, just leave one word in the comments. Love. So we know that you didn't just watch this story, but truly felt it, walked with it, and understood it from the heart. People like you are truly the heartbeat of this channel. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? We read every single comment, and we deeply value your most honest thoughts, because maybe you will be the one who helps shape the next story, one that dives even deeper into the hearts of millions. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe that love, courage, and sacrifice are stories worth spreading.